She had been only 7 when that night carved itself into her mind. The world outside was quiet, filled with the stillness of suburban dark, yet inside the house there was unrest. She awoke to faint vibrations under her feet, voices straining against silence. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. The sound that followed was unlike anything she had ever heard. Not the bang of a door or the rattle of shutters in the wind, but a sharp metallic strike, final and unforgiving. It cut through the night and left her small chest tightening as though something invisible pressed against it. The smell reached her next, acrid, raw, and unsettling. It clung to the air with a heaviness that did not belong in a safe home. The scent of gasoline, mixed with a strange bitter tang, spread through the hall like smoke from an unseen fire. It made her throat dry and her stomach twist. She slid from her bed, her bare feet cold against the floorboards, and crept toward the door. A thin beam of light spilled into the darkness beneath it. She hesitated, her hand trembling above the handle, but curiosity and fear pulled her forward. She opened the door, just enough to see. The living room was cloaked in shadows, bodies moving quickly, their gestures sharp and frantic. Her father stood tall in the center, his shoulders rigid, his face carved with severity. When his eyes caught hers, they froze her where she stood. That look was an order in itself. Silence, obedience, forgetfulness. Her mother appeared behind him, fragile and trembling. Tears streaked her face, reflecting the dim light. She held something pressed tightly to her chest, rocking slightly as though to calm herself, though nothing about her seemed calm. She looked broken, her expression carrying a grief too large for words. The voices filled the room again, low and heated, as if every word was edged with fear. She could not catch the sentences, only fragments, distorted by urgency. The tones, anger, despair, panic, echoed in her ears louder than any meaning. She understood none of it, yet felt everything. Fear overwhelmed her, but her body moved on instinct. She backed into her room, carefully easing the door closed, praying the hinge would not betray her. Once inside, she crawled beneath the blanket, pulling it over her head, as if thin fabric could shield her from what she had just seen. Her small body shook. The scent of gasoline still lingered in her nostrils, refusing to fade, reminding her with every breath that what she had witnessed was not a dream. She buried her face into the pillow, but her mind replayed her mother's tears and her father's silent command. The night dragged on endlessly. Sleep came in fragments, broken by faint noises and the rhythm of her racing heartbeat. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps, sometimes the creak of doors. Each sound felt heavier, as though the house itself was weighed down by secrets it could not contain. When morning arrived, pale light spread across her room, but it brought no relief. She rose with eyes heavy from half-sleep, every detail of the night clinging to her skin. At breakfast, the table looked unchanged, plates, cups, bread neatly arranged. But beneath that surface lay something unspoken. Her parents sat as if nothing had happened. Their voices were calm, deliberate, rehearsed. They spoke of ordinary matters, groceries, errands, the weather outside. Each word was too neat, too controlled, like actors reciting lines from a script meant to erase the chaos of the night before. When she dared to speak, to mention the sounds and the smell, the response was swift and suffocating. Her father dismissed it with a gentle firmness, telling her she had been dreaming. Her mother lowered her gaze, refusing to meet her daughter's eyes, her lips trembling with unshed words. The dismissal cut deeper than the fear. They did not comfort her or explain. Instead, they made her doubt herself, as though her own senses were treacherous. She sat in silence, chewing food that turned to ash in her mouth, and wondered if she truly had imagined it all. But as the days passed, the fragments only sharpened. The metallic strike returned in her ears each time a car door slammed outside. The gasoline smell haunted her whenever engines roared in the street. Her mother's tear-streaked face appeared whenever she closed her eyes too long. The memory became a private burden, one she dared not mention again. Each attempt to recall it aloud was met with laughter or correction, convincing her that truth was dangerous. So she learned to carry it in silence, a stone lodged deep inside her chest. At night, she often woke with terror. The sound, the smell, the shadows. They replayed without mercy, dragging her back into the moment. She lay stiff in her bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for voices that never came. The silence of the house was worse than noise. As years passed, the memory blurred at its edges, but the core never changed. She could no longer tell if she remembered exactly or if her mind had reshaped it. Yet the feeling remained untouched. Something dreadful had happened, and she had been forced to forget. That night lingered like a ghost, trailing her wherever she went. It was not loud or obvious, but it whispered in quiet moments, reminding her she had once seen something she should not have. She carried it unknowingly into the rest of her life, a shadow that refused to fade. She grew into adolescence beneath the weight of an unspoken truth. The memory of that night lingered like a ghost at the edge of her vision, never fading, never explained. When she tried to speak of it, the words slipped from her lips in fragments, but they were always met with the same dismissive response. Her family insisted she had imagined everything, planting doubt where certainty had once been. Laughter became their weapon. Whenever she described the smell of gasoline or her mother's tears, her father chuckled softly, telling her she had a wild imagination. Her mother shook her head, lips pressed thin, muttering that children often confused dreams with reality. Even her siblings, too young to understand, joined in the mockery, calling her dramatic. Each reaction tightened the silence around her throat. The ridicule did not end with words. Sometimes her parents exchanged glances across the table, their eyes rolling as though tired of her persistence. Other times they spoke of doctors and therapists within her earshot, suggesting she was prone to exaggeration or instability. These whispers carried more weight than outright denial, weaving a narrative that her mind was fragile. Over time, she learned the cost of speaking. Each attempt to recall that night left her feeling smaller, more isolated, as if her reality was a fragile construction only she could see. So she began to lock it away, tucking the memory deep inside, carrying it as a secret burden that grew heavier each year. Outwardly, she pretended to forget, but inwardly the image sharpened. At school, she drifted between lessons. Her mind pulled back to the same fragments, her mother's trembling hands, her father's eyes demanding silence, the scent that clung like smoke. These visions would strike suddenly, during math class or while reading, leaving her disoriented. Teachers noticed her distraction, but she never explained. To share would only mean more disbelief. Her nights became restless battlegrounds. Dreams replayed the shadows of that evening, sometimes in exact detail, other times distorted into grotesque versions of truth. She would wake gasping, her sheets damp with sweat, convinced for a moment she had returned to that childhood night. Her cries went unheard, dismissed as ordinary nightmares of a sensitive child. She began to doubt herself. Maybe they were right. Maybe her mind twisted dreams into false memories. But doubt could not erase the sensations that returned so vividly. She could still smell gasoline whenever cars idled too close, still see her mother's tear-streaked face when strangers wept in films. The world itself became a constant reminder. To survive, she mastered silence. She wore a mask of compliance, nodding when told she was mistaken, smiling when they teased her about her imagination. Inside, though, she collected every detail that surfaced, like pieces of a puzzle she dared not assemble. Silence became her shield, even as it suffocated her. The years layered over her like sediment, each one pressing the memory deeper, yet refusing to bury it. With every passing birthday, she became more aware of the divide between what she was told and what she had seen. Her childhood laughter thinned, replaced by caution. She grew into a girl who watched more than she spoke, a listener trapped by what she could never say. Gaslighting became the constant background of her life. If she stumbled or forgot something, it was attributed to her unstable imagination. If she questioned inconsistencies, she was told she misremembered. Even her happiest moments carried the undertone of doubt, as though her perception could not be trusted. Slowly, she began to wonder if she truly was broken. Yet beneath the surface, resilience took root. The silence forced her inward, sharpening her ability to observe. She noticed details others overlooked. The way her father's jaw clenched when accidents were mentioned on the news. The way her mother's eyes glazed over at the sound of sirens. These subtle tells became the language of truth that her family refused to speak aloud. Her friends sometimes asked why she seemed distant, why she paused before answering simple questions. She had no way to explain the burden she carried. She learned to change the subject, to laugh when expected, to keep the secret world of her thoughts hidden. Trust became a fragile commodity she rarely offered. The years did not erase the memory. They etched it deeper. It grew with her, evolving as she matured, its fragments colored by new understanding. She realized that what she had witnessed was not ordinary, that the silence of her family was not protection, but concealment. And though she told no one, her conviction grew that something had been terribly wrong. The girl who once cried in her pillow became a young woman with steady eyes, but inside she still carried the same questions. The images returned in flashes, sharpened by age rather than dulled. Each time she smelled gasoline, each time she saw her mother avoid her gaze, the weight of that night pressed against her ribs. She never spoke of it again. But silence did not mean surrender. The memory remained alive, pulsing just beneath the surface, demanding to be remembered. She carried it through the years, a secret shadow walking beside her, waiting for the day when truth could no longer be ignored. She returned to the old house with the heaviness of grief pressed into her chest. The relative who had once lived there was gone, leaving behind a silence that seemed louder than any voice. Dust clung to the corners of each room, as though time itself had settled into the walls, waiting for her arrival. She moved slowly, her footsteps soft against the floorboards that creaked in protest. The house carried the scent of age, faded perfume, worn paper, and something faintly metallic, like forgotten coins. Every object she touched carried memory, some familiar, others blurred by years. She searched through drawers and cabinets not for treasure, but for fragments of belonging, something to tether her to the past that had always slipped from her grasp. In the bedroom, tucked beneath a stack of folded linens, she discovered a worn, leather-bound diary. The cover was cracked, the corners frayed, but the pages inside still carried neat lines of handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, uncertain if she had permission to look inside, yet unable to resist. The words drew her in, quiet but unrelenting. The entries began ordinary, lists of errands, notes about visits, descriptions of weather. Then, as she turned the pages, she noticed a shift. The tone grew heavier, the words more urgent. One passage mentioned a late-night journey, unexpected and hurried, filled with dread. Another described fear that clung like smoke, fear of something seen, but never spoken. The most unsettling entry came near the middle. It spoke of a stranger, someone who had been there one moment, and then was gone forever. The writer noted the absence in stark words. He never came home. The sentence was short, but it carried the weight of something final, something irreversible. Her breath caught as she read it again and again. The diary seemed to whisper directly to her, confirming what she had always suspected. The shadows of her childhood memory aligned with the words before her eyes. She felt as though the pages themselves carried echoes of that night. The fear, the secrecy, the unspoken grief that had haunted her for so long. She closed the diary for a moment, clutching it against her chest. The weight of it felt like proof, yet proof without clarity. Questions multiplied instead of answers. Who was the stranger? What had really happened that night? Why had the family chosen silence over truth? Each question pressed against her ribs, demanding resolution. Restless, she searched further through the belongings left behind. Boxes of yellowed letters, photographs with faces fading into sepia, stacks of magazines and newspapers. She sifted through them until one thin slip of paper caught her attention. It was a newspaper clipping, folded neatly and hidden between pages of an old cookbook. The headline was blunt: "Pedestrian killed in late-night accident." Her pulse quickened as she read the details. The incident had taken place during the same month, the same year as her memory. The article described a hit and run, the victim left lifeless on the roadside, the driver never identified. The words blurred, but the meaning was sharp, stabbing into her mind. Her body went cold, as though the house itself had dropped in temperature. The clipping, paired with the diary, formed a chilling alignment. It was no longer a child's distorted memory. It was a crime. Her family had lived in its shadow, forcing silence upon her, while a life had been taken and forgotten outside their doors. She sat on the floor, the diary and clipping spread before her. The air seemed heavy, thick with revelation. The puzzle she had carried for years began to take shape, though the pieces were jagged and cruel. She realized she had never been wrong as a child. She had seen what she thought she had seen. The weight of validation did not bring comfort. Instead, it deepened her unease. Every denial, every dismissal, every time they told her she was imagining things, those had been lies. Lies meant to protect someone, perhaps all of them, at the cost of her sanity and an innocent life. Her hands shook as she gathered the items. The diary felt intimate, private, yet necessary. The clipping was public, cold and factual, yet incomplete. Together, they told a story half hidden, half revealed. She could feel the truth pressing closer, too close to ignore, too heavy to carry alone. That night, she sat awake in the house, listening to its quiet. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo the weight of the past. She stared at the diary under the dim glow of a lamp, rereading the same passages until the words burned into her memory. The clipping lay beside it like a warning. Her mind refused rest. She saw her father's stern eyes, her mother's tears, the smell of gasoline drifting again through her imagination. These fragments no longer felt like a child's fears, but the beginnings of a truth deliberately hidden. The past had clawed its way back into her life, demanding attention. The more she thought, the clearer it became that the pieces fit together. A late-night accident, a stranger who never returned home, and a family locked in secrecy. It was all there, waiting to be uncovered. She realized with a cold certainty that she had stumbled into evidence of a buried crime. She could no longer pretend it was only memory or fantasy. The diary and clipping were anchors, pulling her into the truth she had been denied for years. Doubt was gone, replaced by a steady, gnawing certainty. Something terrible had happened, and her family had worked tirelessly to bury it. She held the diary one last time before setting it on the nightstand. The cover creaked, as if it carried its own sigh of exhaustion. She whispered nothing, spoke nothing, but inside her mind a decision took shape. The years of silence were ending. The past was no longer a shadow. It was a truth demanding to be brought into the light. She began her search in the silence of libraries and municipal archives. Dust-covered boxes lined the shelves, filled with forgotten reports and neglected files. She moved carefully, sifting through brittle pages, her hands trembling with both caution and urgency. Each folder seemed like a locked door, and she longed for the one that would finally open to her past. The police reports were difficult to access, buried behind bureaucracy and layers of indifference. Some clerks dismissed her politely, others barely looked at her. Yet persistence became her weapon. She learned to request specific dates, certain districts, narrowing the field until finally, thin reports surfaced. They were brief, fragmented. but they spoke of an accident that had remained unresolved. The language of the reports was clinical, stripped of emotion. Words like pedestrian, fatal, unidentified vehicle filled the page. The details mirrored the clipping she had found, confirming the connection. Her chest tightened as she read the stark descriptions of a life ended abruptly. The paper carried no sorrow, but she felt it deeply, as if it belonged to her. She did not stop with the records. She turned to the neighborhood where the house stood, walking the familiar streets with new eyes. Time had changed the faces, but some had remained. Neighbors who had lived there for decades opened their doors hesitantly, their gazes flickering when she asked about the night in question. The responses were cautious, fragmented. Some spoke of noises heard late that evening, of cars moving when none should have. Others fell into silence mid-sentence, shaking their heads, retreating into guarded expressions. It was the silence that unsettled her the most, louder than words, heavy with secrets no one dared to name. In one conversation, an elderly woman lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. She recalled seeing the family car parked strangely in the driveway that night, its front end covered with a tarp despite the clear weather. She offered no further detail, her eyes clouded with the fear of saying too much. That fear echoed what the heroine had always known. Her search eventually led her to a distant relative, someone she barely remembered from childhood. He had been a teenager back then, restless and observant, caught between loyalty and confusion. When she approached him, his eyes revealed the burden of years, as though he had carried something too heavy for too long. At first he resisted, claiming he remembered nothing of significance. But her persistence wore through his defenses, and slowly, haltingly, he confessed. He had heard the commotion that night, the shouting and hurried footsteps. Curiosity had drawn him to the garage, where he saw the car with its dented hood and streaks of something dark glistening under the dim light. He admitted that he had known, even then, that it was blood on the bumper. His voice shook as he described the sight, the metallic smell that lingered in the air. He had wanted to tell someone, but before he could, the adults silenced him. They told him it was a private matter, warning him never to repeat what he had seen. The memory had haunted him for years, buried but never gone. When he spoke of it now, his words carried both relief and dread, as though releasing the secret after decades came at a heavy cost. His admission shattered the last remnants of doubt. What she remembered as a child had not been a dream. It had been reality. She felt both sickened and strangely steady as she listened. The image of her father's eyes, her mother's tears, the smell of gasoline, all of it aligned with his confession. It was no longer a fragmented suspicion. It was truth, witnessed by another, undeniable in its clarity. Fear gripped her briefly, the kind that comes when the ground beneath shifts and reveals an abyss. Yet the fear quickly hardened into something else. Determination rose where hesitation had lived for years. For the first time, she saw a path forward, a chance to bring what was buried into light. She left his house carrying more than just words. She carried confirmation, the key that unlocked her fractured memories and bound them to reality. The silence her family had imposed on her had cracked, leaving space for truth to grow. She walked into the night air with a steadier step than before. Every detail replayed in her mind as she moved forward. The car, the blood, the warnings that silenced them all. Each memory sharpened, no longer blurred by doubt. She realized she had not been unstable, not delusional. She had been right, and they had forced her to question her own sanity to protect themselves. The burden of proof was still incomplete, but she knew now that she was not chasing shadows. The trail was real, and it led straight into the heart of her family. What had once been a child's haunting fear had transformed into an adult's resolve. She understood what she had to do. That night, as she returned to her own home, she felt the weight of both dread and clarity. The past was no longer a silent ghost. It had a shape, a story, and witnesses, and she was the one who would ensure it was no longer erased. She prepared with care, every document arranged, every note highlighted. The diary lay at the top of the pile, its leather cover cracked with age, its pages holding truths her family had long denied. The newspaper clipping was folded neatly beside it, alongside the testimony she had recorded from her distant relative. Together, they formed a case strong enough to shatter silence. The plan required patience. She disguised the gathering as a reunion, a fragile attempt at reconciliation after years of distance. Invitations were sent, phrased with warmth that masked the storm beneath. Her words promised peace, yet her intent was justice. None suspected the trap set beneath the surface of civility. When the day arrived, the house filled slowly. Familiar faces entered with guarded smiles, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. Old tensions hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. She greeted each relative with calm restraint, her voice steady though her heart beat fast, knowing what was waiting outside. Beyond the door, 2 police officers stood quietly, hidden from the gathering inside. Their presence was both shield and sword, waiting for her signal. She had arranged it carefully, knowing that the truth, once revealed, might provoke denial or violence. She wanted the law present to witness what had been hidden. The family settled into the living room, voices subdued, glances darting nervously. She stood before them, her hands resting on the stack of papers. Silence fell, as they realized she had called them not for reconciliation, but for revelation. The air tightened, thick with anticipation as she prepared to speak. Her words came measured, deliberate. She began with the diary, reading aloud passages that described the night of fear and urgency. Her voice did not tremble, though inside her chest her heart thundered. Each sentence pulled the room deeper into the past, forcing them to hear what had been buried. Faces shifted. Some stiffened, others looked away. Her mother's eyes lowered, refusing to meet hers, while her father's jaw locked in anger. Still, she continued, her tone unyielding. The diary spoke of the stranger who never returned, of panic and secrecy. The truth filled the silence like smoke. Next, she unfolded the newspaper clipping, holding it up for all to see. The headline struck like a hammer. A life lost, justice denied, a driver never found. She read aloud the details, each word echoing against the walls. The date on the article matched the night she had never forgotten. The room grew still, as if sound itself had abandoned them. The silence became unbearable, heavier than shouting. She felt their stares pressing into her, some with disbelief, others with fear. It was not only her accusation, it was evidence, undeniable and sharp, cutting through their denial. Then she revealed the testimony, recounting the words of her relative who had seen the car, the blood, the silence forced upon him. His memory confirmed hers, weaving 2 voices into a single truth. She presented it not as speculation, but as corroboration, binding their lies into a net of guilt. The accused relative shifted uneasily, his face paling as the evidence mounted. At first he scoffed, claiming it was imagination, coincidence, nothing more. But his voice lacked conviction, and his denial cracked beneath the weight of proof. The police presence outside pressed invisibly against him, leaving him cornered. His protests grew louder, desperate, yet unconvincing. He called the diary ramblings, the clipping irrelevant, the testimony false. Each word rang hollow, bouncing back against the walls of the room that now felt like a courtroom. The family watched, frozen, as the mask of certainty crumbled before their eyes. Others began to stir uneasily, shifting in their seats. Some whispered among themselves, voices trembling with the fear of what the truth implied. No one rose to defend him with conviction. The silence of decades collapsed, exposing their complicity, their willingness to look away when it mattered most. She stood unmoved, her eyes locked on him. The fear that had once silenced her was gone, replaced by resolve. For the first time, she was not the child dismissed as unstable. She was the witness, the bearer of truth, and she refused to step back into shadows. The accused relative faltered under the weight of her gaze. His voice broke, his denials weakened. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his hands clenched, seeking control that was slipping away. The room held its breath, waiting for the final fracture, the collapse of years of lies. The moment came like a shattering glass. His words stumbled, his defenses failing, and the officers entered at her signal. Their quiet authority filled the space, confirming that this was no longer a family matter, but a crime. He sagged in his chair, defeated by both truth and law. As the officers approached, the family sat in stunned silence. The weight of what had been hidden for decades pressed down upon them all. The accused was led away, his protest reduced to whispers that carried no power. The sound of the door closing behind him marked the end of denial. The room remained heavy, filled with the echoes of what had been revealed. No one spoke, for words could not mend what had been broken. She stood alone in the center, the evidence still spread before her, the silence louder than any scream. Justice had stepped into the house and nothing could erase it. Her chest rose and fell with exhaustion, yet also with release. The confrontation had ended not with reconciliation, but with exposure. She had brought the truth into the open, forcing them all to face what they had tried to bury. The silence of her childhood was shattered forever. The door closed behind the officers, leaving the house engulfed in silence. The absence of sound pressed against the walls, heavier than any outburst could have been. Chairs remained occupied, but no one moved. The air itself seemed frozen, holding the weight of decades that had just unraveled in front of them. Faces turned inward, eyes refusing to meet one another. Shame lingered like smoke, drifting across the room, settling into every corner. Those who had chosen silence in the past now confronted the hollowness of that choice. Their unity had dissolved, replaced by a void too wide to cross. Her mother sat rigid, hands clenched, staring into the floorboards as though they might open and swallow her. Her father remained stiff, expression locked in stone, yet his eyes betrayed a crack of fear. The family who once stood as a fortress now looked like scattered fragments of themselves. She stood among them, no longer the fragile girl who had been dismissed. The papers and diary lay where she had left them, undeniable, immovable, like stones marking a grave. She felt both stronger and heavier, as though her body carried chains, even while her spirit stood unbroken. The silence of the room was not peace. It was the echo of cowardice, the evidence of bonds destroyed. No word could repair what had been spoken and shown. Trust had been severed, not by her revelation, but by the years of denial that preceded it. The fracture was final. Some relatives rose quietly, unable to bear the stillness. They left the room one by one, retreating without farewell, as though fleeing a fire they could not put out. Their footsteps faded, leaving behind only the weight of absence, each departure another crack in what once was called family. She did not follow them. Instead, she remained, her breath steady, her chest tight with exhaustion. Freedom had come, but not in the shape she had imagined. It carried loneliness in its hands, offering no comfort, only space where illusions had once stood. She accepted it as truth. Memories of her childhood flickered before her eyes, the moments when she had been told she was unstable, when her words had been twisted into madness. Each memory now stood vindicated, but vindication brought no joy. It only emphasized how long she had carried the weight alone. She walked slowly through the house, each room echoing with fragments of voices that had silenced her. The wallpaper, the photographs, the furniture, all seemed like witnesses complicit in the years of denial. Nothing looked the same anymore. The home she had once known was gone. The price of truth was steep. It had cost her the idea of family, the fragile sense of belonging she had tried to preserve even through doubt. Yet in its place came something unyielding. For the first time, she carried her story openly, no longer hidden or dismissed. As the evening deepened, she stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky wide and endless. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of years leave her lungs with every exhale. The silence outside was different from the silence within. It was expansive, not suffocating. It was her own. She realized then that freedom did not mean happiness. It meant the ability to stand without chains, even if the ground beneath was cold and empty. The truth had isolated her, but it had also carved out a space where she could finally breathe without fear. Her steps carried her further from the house, the diary and papers clutched tightly in her bag. They were not just evidence now. They were symbols of endurance, of a voice that had survived being silenced. She no longer feared being called a liar, for proof was etched in every word she carried. Tears came, slow and quiet, not of weakness, but of release. They fell for the years stolen from her, for the innocence corrupted by secrets, for the love that had been poisoned by lies. Yet with each tear came strength, the resilience of someone who had walked through shadows and endured. By nightfall, she understood that she was no longer bound to the family that had betrayed her. Blood had tied them together, but truth had severed the tie. What remained was herself, whole in her brokenness, stronger in her solitude. She no longer needed their approval to exist. Her journey had not brought joy, nor did it bring closure, but it had delivered clarity. She had faced the shadows that haunted her, dragged them into the light, and survived the storm. That survival itself was victory. Even if it carried scars that would never fade, the night closed in around her, calm and unthreatening. She lifted her head, feeling the cool air brush against her skin, carrying whispers of freedom. For the first time, her voice felt unshakable, not because she shouted, but because silence could no longer erase it. The truth had cost her family, her illusions, her sense of belonging. But it had given her something greater, herself. She had walked through the years of denial and emerged with her voice intact. That voice, once silenced, now carried the weight of survival, and no one could take it from her again.